We would like to welcome to this panel today the case of urban farming in DC. And we will have the presentations first, and then at the end of the two presentations, we'll have a Q&A section. My name is Guillermo de los Reyes. I'm a professor at the University of Houston, and I'm also one of the VP for publications at the PSO, at the Police Studies Organization. And we have the pleasure, we have two presentations. We are pleased to have here Mr. David Grosso, a large council member in Washington, D.C. His presentation today is Urban Farming, an alternative solution to reclaim vacant property. Mr. Grosso, thank you for being here. And
good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me out here today. It's exciting for me to be here and talk about urban farming in the District of Columbia for a few reasons. The bill that we introduced in the council a couple years ago really came out of two motivations that I had as a council member. First is that I grew up on a small farm in Virginia, so I understood the value of having, excuse me, I'm struggling. You'll have to excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so I'm trying to push through it. But the work we did on the farm when I was a kid was about organic farming and about making sure that we were giving back to the earth as much as we were taking from it. And so that was something that meant a lot to me. We had fresh vegetables at home when I was growing up, and we had animals, and we had all these great things that come from living and growing up on a farm. And then the other motivation was, how do we begin to reclaim some of the vacant properties and blighted properties that we had in the District of Columbia? The government of the District of Columbia owned a lot of land that nothing was being done with it. And you could go all over the city and see this land. And it frustrated neighbors, it frustrated the council members who were constantly hearing complaints. And the idea was, how do we get to a new place with this property? So we began to go out and visit some of the farms, thank you very much, some of the farms in DC to see what was going on in the first place and just to see what was happening. This is us at Walker Jones. That was a staff outing, which is the farm of Walker Jones, if you know it, over in Northwest 1, Sursum Corda community. This is a seedling day. We were transplanting seedlings. Anyway, I digress. So in 2014, I introduced the bill that is the DC Urban Farming and Food Security Act of 2014. It did three main things. The three things that it did included establishing a land leasing alternative for the mayor to identify properties that were blighted and then to get them out into the market for urban farming so that they would actually take the land, put a 3-year lease on it, and actually get people into that property as quickly as possible. The second thing it did was it created a food donation tax credit. So if you actually raised vegetables and things on the farm and donated that into farmers markets or into food banks and things like that, you would get a pretty big credit. And the last thing it did was it established a real property tax abatement. So right now, if you have abandoned property in DC and you own it and it's a private ownership, we put a big tax on that. We actually tax you more for having land just sit there. And so what we wanted to do was incentivize these owners to actually put some farming into those properties. So we also did, so we have the public land that actually would be 3-year leases to get the farming on them, and this is actually private land to actually reduce the taxes on this land to get farming there. And we learned a lot about, here's a picture that some in the audience will appreciate. This is out at Munkirk Research Farm, which is UDC's farm. We did a tour out there, and when I was there, I learned about this incredible ability to do farming in so many different ways, but one of them was, without even disturbing the land, you can do farming out of these containers, and you can produce a lot of fresh vegetables through hydroponics and other systems. So if you have a blighted property in DC, you could plop down on that property pretty quickly some vegetable producing options and projects that would get fresh vegetables into people's homes much quicker than we can today. This was another motivation of my office was how do you produce and create the quality fresh vegetables that our residents need here in DC to better protect the environment, because you don't have to then ship it in from all over the world. And so that was a big part of what we were trying to do. That was a great visit that day. So then we had the council's committee process. We went through that, changed a few things. One of the things that it did, that we had a really good hearing, and we had folks from the Three-Part Harmony Farm who have a wonderful farm over in the Brookland community. Katrina and I, who's here with me, went out and visited there as well. And what they asked for was, look, we have this property right now we're farming. It's actually on a nonprofit's land. It's actually a nonprofit entity owns the land. It's actually a church in Brookland. If we were to do urban farming there and make a profit on it, they would lose their nonprofit status. It made it very complicated. So we decided that what we would do in this bill is we would take and we would exempt that property. The tax-exempt entity would then be able to segregate out that property and allow somebody to make some money on it. And they're going to hopefully do that now. That's at Three-Part Harmony. It also included more incentivizing of community farms. I have to say, I was not really into the community garden stuff, because we have a robust community garden in District of Columbia back as far as World War I. From the Victory Gardens, we have a lot of those still remaining in the District of Columbia. And, you know, interestingly, when I worked for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, we did a tour of every ward looking at these farms and looking at these community gardens. And what we realized was that people are doing this already. It's pretty remarkable how many people grow their own vegetables in the District of Columbia, how they share these plots, how they really engage. And, you know, it's partly because our population comes from an agrarian background, migrated up from the South, where previously they had been farmers and they had been engaged in farming. And so it was not a big deal for them to say, oh, I got a little land, I'm going to just grow some vegetables for myself. What I was trying to do was a little different than that, was really incentivize mass-scale urban farming so that we could begin to have the production that we needed for grocery stores, for restaurants, for all those folks, excuse me, in the community. This would also require the mayor to focus on these vacant lots and to begin to test them. So if they could get 25 of these vacant lots, they could begin to test them for any environmental issues that we needed to mitigate before we could actually farm there. This was a big deal. It was a big process that we went through, and it changed the bill quite a bit. You can see the tax abatement got changed from 50 to 90%. Okay, so then we have this thing in D.C. called the Chief Financial Officer. It's a third-party objective look at all of our bills to see what they're going to cost the government. The CFO took a look at it and realized that it was going to cost more than anybody would have thought what it was going to cost, and put a big number on it. So we had to make the bill subject to appropriations, which means we couldn't pay for it up front. We had to figure out how to pay for it piecemeal as we went along. The bill did pass on April 30th of this year, and it became official law this year. I have copies of it over here with Katrina if anybody wants a copy of it. Because it was unfunded, I had to figure out what I was going to do in order to make sure that we could actually roll some of this out. So in the budget process this last year for fiscal year 2016, we were able to find $460,000 to just start the process. So the $460,000 just goes to the tax abatements and also the conversion of somebody being able to, farm on nonprofit land. So that quick conversion. It is a small amount of money. It's supposed to also fund a staffer over at the Department of Parks and Recs, who was supposed to be looking for more of these properties out there. So that's one of the challenges. Let's see. At the same time, Chairman Mendelson, who had worked on this with me pretty extensively, introduced another bill that would bring it back into alignment with what we were trying to do and exclude out the community gardens question, which he had added in. So it's kind of sausage making there, but it is complicated how that worked out, and we're still waiting on him to move that bill. So that would be another big step in the right direction. We went out and visited more farms, these folks do all container gardens at schools, and it's really remarkable some of the stuff that they've been able to accomplish in these schools because they're sending these vegetables home with kids every single day in the spring and summer and fall. So, the current status of the DC Urban Farming and Food Security Act is that as of October, the Chief Financial Officer's office is now working to standardize a form for the real property tax abatement. Then at the time of the CREST, CFO has not had anybody request any of this yet to get the tax abatement, but I think it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Once they get their act together, which they're working on right now, then you'll start to see requests come in. But it's a big deal, and I know that Lily can tell you about that as she goes up next. We followed up with DPR, and they have not hired somebody yet, but it's only December, so they only got the money in late October, so hopefully they'll get somebody on board soon, and we're waiting to hear back from them. And I guess the only thing I can say is that in February, we're going to be doing oversight hearings, and I sit on the Committee on Finance and Revenue, and so I will be asking a whole slew of questions of the CFO's office around this particular tax abatement program and how we can get it moving faster. And also in the budget process, I'll be looking for more money in order to jump this into there to get these vacant lots flipped over. I wanted to note just a couple other things while I had everyone here that we've done in DC around farming and around really embracing the value of having good quality food grown right here in our city. And each of these, you can read it as you look up there, but we have a sustainable DC plan, which requires that we look for an additional 20 acres of land for growing food by 2032 in the city. That's something that is in the works. Healthy Schools Act and the Healthy Tots Act are both programs that try to get more and more fresh vegetables into our schools, helping kids learn how to cook them, understand what they are, engage with their food in a different way than they normally have. And I went out and did a tour. I did a 6-school tour in 1 week of school lunches this past, just a couple months ago. And in that process, it was interesting to see how many schools actually already are doing this, where they have a garden on site, where they're actually bringing the vegetables in and teaching the children how to do what they need to do to make that food work. And there's some really great nonprofits that are also engaged in our schools right now that are doing the same thing. And lastly, we did pass the DC Food Policy Council and Director Act. This was done in partnership with Councilmember Mary Che, and basically we now have a food policy director on staff in the government whose job it is to better coordinate all of the efforts that are going around urban ag and around food policy and changing the way we do things. There's a ton of other stuff we do regarding, for example, food markets. We have all these markets in the district now. You can actually go out and get your food stamps and other things, can qualify for buying vegetables at the markets. There's still a doctor's prescription for vegetables through Unity Healthcare and other programs that can go into a food market and actually get the prescription. So, I mean, this is for vegetables and things like that. We're also trying more and more to get into the schools the fresh vegetables that we need to get in there in order to educate the students, but also in order to get them the vegetables that they need in order to live a healthy life. I'm sure that Lily will go into that as well. I just want to give a huge thank you to a lot of the advocates. You know, a lot of the work we do in the council is done with the help of advocates. We can't do it ourselves. We go out and learn. We better understand what's going on, and these are some of the groups that we work with regularly. And finally, I'll just say in conclusion, that food security is built on, in my opinion, 3 basic pillars: the availability of good food, food access, and food use. So my goal is to use the platforms such as this panel, but also the work that I do on the council to encourage the conversation around food security and sustainability in the District of Columbia, to make it possible for everybody to grow up the way I did on a farm where I had unlimited quality food every single day because my mom was committed to organic farming and putting the best and highest quality food on our table every single day. which I know made a huge difference for me as I was growing up and all my brothers and sisters, because I believe, we're healthier for it and stronger and more able to do what we do today. So anyway, there's my contact if you have any more questions. And again, sorry for my slight cold here. It's like frustrating. I'm not.
Thank you very much. Well, we're going to entertain questions at the end. We will go with our Arcadia. Okay. Yes, that's fine. You can bring. So our presenter now is Ms. Pamela Hess from Arcadia Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture. And here you have.
Thank you. I'm the executive director of Arcadia. We are a 501c3. We have a farm in Virginia. We do most of our work in DC. And I come to you I'm here, I feel like, to put urban farming in its context as to why it's so necessary. The food system fails, particularly the urban core. There's a long story about how we got here, and I'll try to shorten it. And it's basically up until about World War II, our food systems in this country were mostly local and regional, and every town had a grocer and a butcher and a baker, and the food came from surrounding farms. After World War II, we have a number of forces that put us into globalization. We have refrigeration, we now have a highway system, and we have increasing movements from the rural areas into the city where the well-paying jobs were. And what happened from that is small farms began collapsing or joining. Big business got into farming. Grocery stores started getting to be enormous and then moving out of the city. And in DC particular, we saw a real change after the '68 riots, where particularly in African-American neighborhoods, and when the riots affected the grocery stores and the local businesses, a lot of them packed up and left, as did the middle class. And so the middle class moved out to the suburbs, both black and white, and that left a small economic base to support the independent stores that were left. And then you have the rise of the super Targets and the Walgreens and the Walmarts and what's that new one, Wegmans. All of these are outside of the city because they require massive footprints and massive parking lots. And in DC, it's really hard to get grocery stores cobbled together from these tiny little lots. You know, a grocery store needs at least 10,000 feet, and so therefore you're dealing with lots of different landowners. So there's a whole lot of problems. The problem that I see is that people looking at this from the outside say, well, there's not grocery stores in DC and there's not healthy food in DC because the people there don't want it and they won't support it. And I'm going to tell you why we know that to be a falsity. So there are basically two food systems now in the country. If you have money, that gets you into one food system. If you have a car, you can drive wherever you want to go. You can order your food on Peapod. It can be delivered to your house by drone, apparently. If you earn a low income and don't have transportation, you're very much limited to your immediate food environment. So what's available in your neighborhood? A couple times a week, maybe you can get on the bus and make a couple of transfers, but you can't bring back that much food because it's just hard. It's hard to do. So the food system, of course, matters. Because we as a nation are paying a massive public health price for this, right? I'll go through a couple of statistics for you. This number says 190 billion. CDC is upgrading this all the time. We're probably closer to $300 billion every year that we spend as a nation on chronic diseases that are absolutely avoidable and are caused by the food we eat and how much of it we eat. This tracks very closely with the rise of processed cheap foods that are incredibly effective at delivering calories and cheap at the point of sale, but devastatingly expensive when you get to the doctor's office. Thanks, Lily. So diabetes rates have climbed steadily since 1980. You can see that they really begin taking off in 1990. So 1990 sort of right at the beginning of that curve. And something really important to note here is that people who have diabetes who are low income are 10 times as likely to suffer from an amputation because of their diabetes than people who have wealth. This is often posited as a question of healthcare access, but really what it is, it's about food access. If you don't have diabetes, you're not going to face the prospect of an amputation. This is particularly interesting to me because of where I come from. I am not a nonprofit person by training. This is my first nonprofit job. Prior to this, I was a national security reporter. I spent a fair amount of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and consequently spent a fair amount of time visiting folks who were injured in Walter Reed. And so that sort of shaped how I view this. The people at Walter Reed who I visited often had lower limb amputations, and it's because of IEDs. So when I started working with Arcadia and I went out into the neighborhoods that Arcadia serves, I saw a lot of people with lower limb amputations. And I was like, wow, there's an awful lot of war veterans here. And my staff said, they're not war veterans, they have diabetes. There have been 1,700 amputations in 10 plus years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan on Americans. 74,000 diabetic amputations every year in the United States. This is a food system problem, and DC is particularly affected. I think DC residents spend about $300 million a year treating their diabetes. Imagine if we could take that $300 million a year in diabetic treatments and put it into food and preventing the disease instead of keeping going. Thanks. So obesity rates have also doubled. Let's keep rolling. The poor are 2 times as likely to be obese than the wealthiest. And once again, let me bring you back to my central theme. This is not about poor people really liking Little Debbie snack cakes. This is about poor people having less access to healthy foods over generations. That creates a pattern of eating and a lack of culinary knowledge, and also an expectation that that kind of food is not for them because it is not available to them. And it is not available to them because they don't want it. It is not available to them for a host of economic reasons that has nothing to do with demand, which, once again, I will be proving to you. This is a controversial chart. USDA doesn't love it, but I can explain it to you. The cost of fruits and vegetables relative to the cost of unhealthy processed foods has increased by 40% over roughly the last 30 years, while the cost of processed foods has remained relatively the same. Obviously, if you're a person on limited income with a small food budget, you are going to make some rational decisions about how you're spending that money, where you're putting your money into more calories at a lower cost. And obviously, that has a profound effect on public health. Let's go. So the dual food system has a disproportionate impact. As you can see, the poor, particularly in DC, the poor and minorities are much more likely to be affected. Next slide. In DC, or across the nation, in 2011, which is the last year that this data is available, the top 20% of income earners spent only 6.8% of their income on food, and the bottom 20% spent more than a third of their income on food. So you can see the economic pressure there. Now, Health Affairs. This is a magazine in January of 2014. It was 2014. They put out a really fascinating study. And it's one that when you go back and talk with people about this to help them understand that regardless of where you stand politically, this has an economic impact on all of us. There was a California hospital chain with 9 hospitals that looked over, I think, 8 years of data at people who were being admitted to the hospital every week for blood sugar issues, so diabetics and pre-diabetics. And what they found is that for the first 3 weeks of every month for 9 years, people of low income and median and high income were admitted to the hospital at the exact same rates every week until the last week of the month, when the food stamps ran out and the number of low income people being admitted to the hospital for blood sugar increases spiked by 27%. Each one of those hospital admissions cost $1,100. So putting money into programs like Produce Plus, which we're going to talk about, into SNAP, can avoid that incredible cost to us because low-income people are more likely to be using Medicaid and other public insurance programs. So there's a profound economic reasons why we need to do this. Now, the disproportionate impact, communities of color have 2 to 3 times fewer supermarkets. This is across the nation. Black communities have half the number of grocery stores, full-service grocery stores, as white communities. Latino communities, just a third. This is about food access. What kind of food, what kind of healthy food can you get? The corollary to this, of course, is that in predominantly African-American and Latino communities, what you have are the smaller stores that are much more reliant on shelf-stable processed foods because they last a long time, they're cheap, and they're engineered for us to really, really like them. I love those dried up Cheetos that are really spicy. They're so good, but they are engineered that way. They trigger overeating impulses in humans, salt, sugar, and fat. That is exactly how these things are formulated. Let's go. At any given time in Washington, D.C., this stat comes out of a really interesting study that was done by a woman named Mari Gallagher, who was hired by Walmart to look at the city's foodscape. But in D.C., you are 14 times as likely to pass by fast food or a 7-Eleven or other convenience store food than you are a store that can promote a healthy diet. People, regardless of income, eat what is closest to them. So in DC, it's stacked against you. You're going to pass 14 Popeyes and 7-Elevens and Pizza Huts before you get to the first place that has any vegetables for you to eat. We talked about where the grocery stores are. The farmers markets also in DC tend to be clustered in wealthier neighborhoods. There's a reason for this. Farmers need to make about $1,000 an outing at a farmer's market in order to make it worth their while to take a day away from their fields, to get up at 4 in the morning and do their harvesting, spend all day at the farmer's market, and then have to basically trash or donate what's left at the end of the day, because 8 hours in the sun is not really good for produce. So a farmer has to make a calculation. Is it going to be worth it? Am I going to sell enough in this neighborhood in order for me to serve that neighborhood? And the answer tends to be no. So you find a long, long waiting list of, I think, of 120 farmers waiting to get into the Dupont Circle Farmers Market. And the work that Arcadia is doing, we can't get a single farmer to come out and stand next to us. And I understand it, because they're not going to make enough money. It's a simple economic argument. This all comes around to urban farming towards the end. Let's go. So in Ward 7 and 8, just so you understand, the average household income is $34,000. It's 96% African American, and 72% of residents are obese or overweight. This has to do with the kind of food that they have access to regularly. 15% suffer from diabetes. The national rate of obesity and overweight is somewhere around 35 or 38% now. The national rate of obesity is 8%. In white DC, the rate of obesity is about 2%. So you can see that there's a major disparity there. And then on the bottom, wards 2 and 3 are the wealthier districts in DC. And you can see that there is one grocery store for every 8,500 residents, and in Ward 7 and 8, it's one for every 20,000 residents. This is a dramatic improvement. It used to be one for every 77,000 in Ward 8. Oh, it's back to that now? Lily corrects me. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, let's go. Next one. So Arcadia, we're a nonprofit. We're dedicated to creating a more equitable and sustainable food system. We are growing food, the food that we grow in Virginia, about 17 miles south of the city on a 1-acre market farm, which is expanding to 20 acres. We are harvesting it and putting it onto 2 mobile markets that, could you click it, that we take into this year 19 locations in DC that are not served by other farmers markets or grocery stores. We set up regular weekly stops, same time, same place. We usually have a community partner, and we're there for 3 or 4 hours, and we accept and we double SNAP, WIC, Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Vouchers, and a really innovative program that I hope that you guys know about. It's DC's Produce Plus program. It's an amazingly innovative thing. I'm not sure if you guys even understood what you were doing when you were doing it, but it's incredible. So last year it was funded at about $140,000. This year it was $400,000. I'm going to show you a chart that shows you the impact of this. Basically, if you qualify with income, and there's a number of ways that you can prove your income quality, and Lily can tell you guys more about exactly how this works. You show up at the farmer's market, any day of the week, prove that you can qualify, and you get a $10 voucher for free fruits and vegetables. This is an amazing program because it puts the resources in the pockets of people who don't otherwise have it and couldn't necessarily afford this food. It also puts money in the pockets of farmers. So when you talk about wanting to bring in more farmers from 25% of the food from within 100 miles, this is how you do it, by giving them a market. The problem of our food system is really a problem of poverty. If you have money, you can eat anything you want. If you don't, you're really limited. So this is a bit more about what we do. It doesn't matter. Can you go back one? So our mobile market, we just crunched our numbers. More than 60% of our sales at these 19 stops were made with customers using some form of food assistance, which shows that we're getting the food to people who really need it and don't otherwise have access. About 50,000 pounds of locally sustainably grown foods, and we put $126,000 in the pockets of local farmers who otherwise don't have access to these neighborhoods because they don't have the wherewithal to get there, because they're not going to make enough money if they do. Next slide, please. This just shows you, and this is so important and such a kind of a weird little chart, but do you see how they go straight up? That is the demand for the food that we are selling in neighborhoods that national grocery chains have written off. Neighborhoods where they say people don't want this kind of food, that is the demand. We started with $44,000 our first year. The next year, a 50% increase to $66,000. The next year is an increase to, when we added a second bus, $143,000. This year, it's $186,000. That number, I think, can keep going up. It's just an issue of capacity. How many buses can we get out there? How many people can we reach? Next slide. Thanks, Lily. So here's the thing. This is the money shot, if you will. The blue is SNAP, so traditional food stamps. Pink is WIC and senior FMNP. Green is matching incentives. We double those first 3 federal programs, and the purple is DC Produce Plus. So nationwide, Congress has identified $20 million a year in the FINI program. It's a matching program. At farmers markets who apply, they can use that money to basically give discounts on produce, and it's meant to put more fruits and vegetables in the hands of people who have less money, which is fantastic. It's $20 million. That's about how much people with SNAP spend at farmers markets every year. SNAP is about $75 to $80 billion, so it's just a drop in the bucket. What DC did by introducing Produce Plus was explode the market for farmers market food amongst people who have a low income. And you can see that Produce Plus dwarfs SNAP, WIC, and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Vouchers all the way through. It's an incredibly effective program, and it's something that DC should be touting from the rooftops and should be expanding to other cities worldwide. This is how you do it, and this proves the point that this is really about putting resources in people's hands to buy food. When you make it affordable, people will come, but quality food has to be quality, because low-income people are not going to waste money on bruised peaches. And that's sort of the instinct that everybody has. Well, let's give them what's left over. But you wouldn't eat a bruised peach, and neither will they, and certainly neither would their children, and they're way too smart to spend money on that because they know it's going to go bad quicker and nobody's going to want to eat it. So it has to be high quality, it has to be convenient, and that's why we bring the mobile markets into the neighborhoods where people with low incomes live and work and go to the doctor and shop and send their kids to school. And it has to be affordable, and we do that through the matching program and then through Produce Plus, which is incredible. What else do we got? This is only mildly interesting if you're deeply interested in our mobile market sales proportions. Go on. This council member, I think you would be interested in it. This is the top 10 produce items through PPP that we sold. So you can see there's a lot of peaches, apples, and plums at the top. We think a lot of families really like fruit because it requires no preparation, and it's sweet and everybody loves it. Next slide. This is kind of what I just said, so I'll skip through that. And if you want to get in touch with us, please do. So we have a farm in Virginia. We also have supplied in the past and continue to do so from urban farms in DC. We're baked into our model is supporting local farms, and so we want to be buying from 3 Part Harmony Farm. We often buy from Common Good City Farm and a number of other ones. But placing farms inside of DC and doing this 20 acres is critically important for a couple of reasons. The first, of course, is that when people see food growing and get involved in food growing, they're much more likely to eat it, and this is particularly true of children. Second, it just tastes better when it is from the neighborhood. Third, you're removing a number of steps and a number of costs between the food being where it is grown and the food getting into the hands of people. The farmers should be making money off the food that they grow, but what you do by having it localized like this is you immediately remove any costs of marketing and transportation and then the markups that come with packaging and all of that stuff. So it's a really genius way of doing it. I don't know that it can absolutely satisfy everybody's produce needs, but it's a critically important part. And I think it also plays an important role in changing people's minds about this food. Do you remember when Obama started and everybody was like, he likes arugula, and it was like some big deal? Like, it's called rocket, and I'm sure you ate it when you were a kid, and it's delicious. We have to remove the stigma about fancy food and help people understand that this food is for everybody. Food is food. It's good for you if it's colorful and grown well. It contributes to public health, and everybody needs to feel that that food is for them. And unfortunately, we have, with all of our foodies and our Instagrams, we sort of skewed that view, and we need to bring food back to what it is, which is health and energy giving, and something that supports a healthy economy and healthy bodies and healthy earth. So thank you very much. I hope that I have helped you understand the case for why we absolutely need this food and how skewed our food system is and the impact that it has on people who are least likely to be able to combat it. So thank you.
if there's sound. That's my dad. It's going to be in the dub them. It's more interesting if you can hear the speak, though.
Our last panelist of the day is Lily Rosen from DC Greens, and she will talk about the case for urban farming in DC. Thank you, Lily.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to get to be on this panel with Pam and with Councilmember Grasso. So I want to introduce DC Greens a little bit. DC Greens is a nonprofit organization. We say we use the power of partnerships to support food education, food access, and food policy in the city. And really what our goal is to live in a city where urban agriculture is a valued element of our cityscape, amongst other things. But in terms of this presentation, that's really what I want to focus on. So DC, as you've heard, has a really rich landscape around urban agriculture. If you have never been to the Rooting DC website, I would definitely recommend that you take a look. Rooting DC is an annual forum and a perennial movement. Every year there's a one-day free conference that you can attend. This year it's going to be on February 27th, which is a Saturday, at Wilson High School. And it brings together more than 60 organizations across the city, including Love and Carrots and the University of the District of Columbia, as well as Arcadia, and many, many, many other organizations working in the food system in DC. There are a lot of us. It's a full day of wonderful, wonderful presentations and workshops. But what you can see in this map, which is on the Rooting DC website, is all of the urban agriculture that's going on here in the city already. So all of the red dots, those mark DC school gardens and community gardens, and all of the yellow dots are DC farmers markets. Some of those red dots are also urban farms. There aren't very many of them yet in DC, but they are in there. And you can click on those dots. It shows you the information about where they are and how you can get in touch with them if you're interested. So why does urban agriculture matter? Urban agriculture matters because it improves food access in a small way. If there's urban agriculture, that means that there are places where people can purchase food right there in their neighborhood. Soon, the new UDC East Capitol Farm over in Capitol Heights, in Ward 7, right over by the Capitol Heights Metro Station, that's going to be a location where people within that community can go and purchase food. They can also learn about how to grow food, and that's a really big deal. And we'll see a little bit later about Three Part Harmony Farm, which is really the backbone of where all of this legislation for urban agriculture came from. They are an urban farm. They're a for-profit farm, and I think that that's a really big deal. It makes a difference that you can see where food is grown, even if it's not a nonprofit space like DC Greens has at the K Street Farm at Walker Jones, where people can come for educational purposes, but just seeing how your food is grown in your neighborhood is a really big deal for education, I think. So bringing this urban agriculture legislation, the DC Urban Farming and Food Security Act, to fruition took a lot of collaboration from many, many different people. We were very excited. DC Greens got involved because Three Part Harmony Farm came to us, I guess it was in the winter of 2014, and they came to us with this little orphan baby. They said, we've been working with Councilmember Grasso's staff. It's been really wonderful, but we have to go back to farming. So can you continue this process through for us? So we were really excited to get to continue working with Councilmember Grasso's staff, with Councilmember Che's staff, to get to work with Councilmember Mendelson's staff, as well as many of the nonprofits and for-profit entities across the city to bring people to come and testify about why this was important to them as individuals, as business owners, as nonprofit actors, and really help make sure that everybody's voices were heard in the process so that we were able to work to make sure that the tax abatement was a really big focus, because that's something that particularly benefits for-profit businesses, which I think is a very exciting part of this legislation versus the way that urban agriculture legislation has been focused in other cities, which is focused much more on nonprofit farming, which is not a bad thing. Being a nonprofit myself, and we have a farm, it's not a bad thing, it's a great thing, but it's really also wonderful to make sure that you're supporting people who are interested in having businesses around urban agriculture and making sure that that's both in the ground or in, somewhere in where you're growing food, but also on the processing side of things as well, which this legislation very gratefully does support. So looking forward, now that this legislation is in place and it's funded, I think that we have a few different opportunities that are available. So one of them is this focus on for-profit business. We're going to see if this video works. It features 3-Part Harmony Farm, which is located over in Brookland. I definitely recommend that you participate. They have a winter CSA that's starting up right now if you're interested. Nope. What do we think? No. Ooh. Maybe? Not available? Darn. Well, if we could have seen it, you would have seen what this video shows, and you can see it online as well through 3-Part Harmony Farm. You can see it. It's up on their Twitter feed as well as on their website. But they had a community day a couple of weeks ago where they brought everybody onto the farm as a chance to celebrate the end of the harvest and also to develop some artwork for the space and to really give a chance for all of the people who have been participating as customers to really have an opportunity to speak with the person who is growing their food. And that's been a really wonderful way. It's a really wonderful way to see how urban agriculture impacts individuals and it impacts communities as well. I think one of the other exciting things about this legislation is that it opens up the opportunity for unconventional growing spaces. This is a picture of Uptop Acres, which is on the roof over at Oyamel, a restaurant over in Chinatown. And what this legislation does is it makes sure that the tax abatement doesn't just apply to in-ground plots, but also takes a look at what is the infrastructure of the city really like. We're not like Detroit where we have, there's a ton of vacant, blighted land. There's some here in DC, but there's also, we have a lot more rooftops. We have old industrial buildings. There's a report from the Office of Planning called Ward 5 Works, and it looks at some of those industrial spaces over in Ward 5, that those places could be really powerful for hydroponics or other types of indoor growing opportunities. So I think that that's a really wonderful piece of this legislation as well. And finally, as Pam was talking about, I think a great opportunity is the city's Produce Plus program. And I think what it's an example of is that what the city is doing is it's really looking at the whole picture. It's not doing it piecemeal. We're really saying, okay, so if we're going to have urban farms, we also need to make sure that there is able to be demand, not just in the wealthier parts in the city, but also in the less wealthy parts of the city. And that's really what the Produce Plus program does, is it helps to make sure that there can be demand for agricultural products, whether that's at farmers markets or hopefully down the line at using the healthy corner stores that DC Central Kitchen runs, and hopefully really to demonstrate that there is demand enough for a grocery store to open, more grocery stores to open in Ward 7 and 8 of the city. So the next steps in this process, there are a couple of them. You heard Councilmember Grasso mention this first one. We need to make sure that the regulations get finalized, and those are in process. The Department of Parks and Recreation and the Chief Financial Officer's offices have been really wonderful about speaking with community members to find out what is going to work for them and making sure that the community also knows what requirements they need from their end of things. They've also been talking with other cities to see how they're implementing similar tax abatements, including in Baltimore, to see if maybe we can align some of those so that we're really creating best practice across the whole country. Next, we're really excited to see yesterday that there are some nominations for the Food Policy Council that have come up. 4 of the positions have been nominated. There are 12 total, sorry. So we're really excited to see those nominations finalized and also confirmed. We have a food policy director, an acting food policy director in the Office of Planning, which we're really excited about as well. We think that this is really going to make sure that as there are regulatory issues, there are people who can be paying attention to those and making sure that we can make the little tweaks and changes that need to happen to make sure that these pieces of legislation are really working for people across the city. The next thing that needs to happen, of course, is connecting landowners and farmers. And the University of the District of Columbia has been working for the past year to identify vacant plots of land across the city. And you can talk more to Lorraine about that.
I can add something real quick to that. So we have been looking at basically, what is the name of the website that gives you all of the information? No. Sorry. There's a website you can basically go on. It's the Data DC. I think it's datadc.com. Yeah. So they have a pile of information about all this vacant land. And we had some students go through and like for one of their projects, they mapped all of these vacant land spaces. And while that was interesting, when we actually went through and vetted it, we did find that there's a lot less land than you think there is actually very packed full. Most of the open space is park space, or like tennis courts or buildings that apparently were just labeled vacant, but are new buildings that went up recently. So and there's a lot of forest land that is vacant, but is not able to be easily just emptied out into a community garden. There's a lot of things like the rooftop gardens are a big opportunity, but also, understanding how much actual space there is. So I have a lot of data that I'm still sifting through, but getting that information and blending it with something like the information about farmers markets and such, so we can start moving forward to say what can be done. Because realistically, we actually don't have a lot of vacant space. It looks like it, but a lot of the vacant space is buildings or already built land that you can't just dig into. And so trying to find other ways, like UDC has aquaponics systems that we're working on putting in across DC, including the East Capitol Urban Farm is going to get an aquaponics system. And that one can be grown in areas where you don't have land to grow in, just land to grow on. Anyways.
So in addition to that, I think one of the other things that's really important is making sure that we're connecting people who are interested in farming with existing training programs that exist, like the Future Harvest CASA Beginning Farmer Training Program. And finally, I think the last thing is to make sure that urban farming is really normalized within the city so that it's something that is seen in all wards of the city. There are a lot of people who, as was mentioned earlier, are doing a lot of pretty intensive gardening for themselves and their neighbors, and making sure that that's something that's valued, and that's a way that we're thinking about how our city is going to continue to develop into the future. Finally, if you are interested in getting involved, there are a couple of ways that you can get involved this winter, as well as looking into next spring. One is to express your support for the regulations around urban agriculture to our new acting DC Food Policy Director, Lane Sidlowski, as well as to the DC Department of Parks and Recreation. I know that they would love to hear from folks to make sure that they know that it's not just a couple of urban farmers who are interested in this, but that there's really a larger community that's excited about this, and to thank them for their hard work pushing this forward. And next, if you're interested in volunteering, DC Greens has great opportunities to get involved both in urban agriculture as well as with farmers markets, mostly in the spring, summer, and fall, not so much in the wintertime, this being the mid-Atlantic. It's a little cold outside, but there are great ways to get involved with those, so I definitely recommend that you take a look at our website if you are interested in volunteering this winter. We're always looking for volunteers for Rooting DC, which is that one-day urban gardening forum. You can also volunteer with Arcadia. They've got wonderful volunteer activities all throughout the year, but again, mostly in the spring, summer, and fall. So thank you so much. Really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you to all the panelists. We'll have a discussion session right now, Q&A. Please raise your hands if you have any questions or comments.
So I actually have a question about the legislation. It was a little unclear to me. I know that the tax abatement is not funded. Oh, okay, sorry. The tax abatement, it's still working and going. You don't have the forms, and that just got funded recently. But I was a little bit confused about how, let's say, a nonprofit did lease out land to, say, a farmer, or lend land to a farmer who was then making profit. That's good. That's already good. Okay, good. I just wanted to double check that was actually, like, even if the tax abatement's still working on, like, pushing through, that people can still do that. Okay, good.
The CFO's office will work with the Office of Property Tax, and then we'll segregate out that land. So the CFO's office will take that land and cut it out from the rest of their land, and then set it at a different tax rate. and then they won't lose their nonprofit status. And that's really Three-Part Harmony's problem. They were trying to make money there and couldn't do it.
General question, will these presentations be available? How do we get them?
We are going to have the recording of this, and also we can request them, and we can post it on the part of the website, on the conference, on the summit, when we publish the proceedings. If the panelists.
Well, that would be great. First of all, excellent presentations and an exciting program. I farm organically in Pennsylvania, and I've been involved for a long, long time. And I appreciate everything you said, Councilman. It's really important stuff. But your leadership was critical to what you've done here in D.C. My question is, looking at all three of these programs, is taking these models and moving them across the country. And this is really critical stuff. I don't think there's a place, any city I've ever been, and by the way, not just big cities, where there are huge deficits of food that could be produced locally. What are the plans? Are there discussions about mobilizing this and moving it forward as a model or models across the country?
So I think one of the big ways that we'll be able to mobilize this across the country is by having the Food Policy Council in place. Many of the members of the Food Policy Council who have been nominated so far are people who work on the national scene more than work on the local scene, and I think that that is going to be a way that we're really able to elevate what it is that we're doing here in DC, because as Councilmember Grasso mentioned in his presentation, there is a lot of legislation here in DC. We have a lot of infrastructure, and I think that we've sort of, DC has sort of done it all under the radar, but there is a really big opportunity, as you're saying, to elevate what we're doing as a model for what the rest of the country is moving towards in bits and pieces.
We at Arcadia, it's a funny construct. The problem with the food system is that it became nationalized and globalized, and what we're doing is trying to recreate a local and regional food system and reinvigorate that. So we're a little conflicted at the idea of expanding nationally, but what we do is consult with other organizations who like to recreate some of what we do. We've done 60 consultations with different groups at no charge on our mobile market program, and I was just at a conference last week. We've also launched a program to train military veterans to farm on our property, and so we're talking about our model there, which is kind of an unusual model. So we are sharing everything. We are completely transparent, and we'll tell everyone the good, the bad, and the ugly of what we're doing, in hopes that they can recreate it without us having to expand and replicate all of the problems that come with making something that should be regional and local into a national.
I think the most difficult part about that is going to be being patient enough for this to actually work, because we are still, I think we're way ahead and we've done some really great stuff, but as the years unfold, we're going to have to study it, and then once the study's done and the research done on it, then we can promote that and encourage other jurisdictions to be along the same path as we're on. But that's the challenge. I mean, we're not there yet. The Food Policy Council is not in place. A lot of the projects that we're working on are still in the infancy stage. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. We have to have commitment from the government here to keep doing it, and then study it.
Could you expand on the Food Council? I mean, where do they come from and how many of them are there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the Food Policy Council was something that had been talked about for a long time. I think a lot of it came out of some of the conversations that happened across the whole community with the Sustainable DC process. And then it was brought forward by my executive director, Lauren Schroeder-Beal, at a hearing last February, and we were very grateful that Councilmember Che and Councilmember Grasso put it forward as a piece of legislation. The Food Policy Council has 4 areas of focus. I'm going to try to remember them all. We'll see how I do. So one of the areas is around workforce development and economic drivers. One of the work groups is around urban agriculture. One is around health and nutrition education. And the last one is around procurement and distribution. And I think that those 4 areas really help make sure that we're focusing on the areas where there are both really amazing things happening in the city, but also where there are challenges. And there are supposed to be 12 members of the Food Policy Council in total, so 3 members on each of those 4 work groups. And then they're supposed to have at least 8, but hopefully more than that, other people who sit as non-voting members as part of each of the work groups. The work group meetings will be open to the public. You'll certainly be able to find information about when those are happening on our website once that starts moving forward. So we're really excited to share that information with everybody. We hope that people will be involved in those conversations. It's certainly not something that just those people on the Food Policy Council are going to be able to participate in and make a difference on. It's really going to take all of us to make sure that it's actually effective.
There was another question.
Yes, hi there. I'm wondering where protein, I haven't heard protein discussed, and couple of questions. Again, are we talking about, or is there any effort here for aquaculture, for example? I know in our farmers markets, I'm in New York, fish increasingly, and it's also a way for small businesses. But how are we going to get to the protein side and the affordability and the quality?
Can I just respond for a second? UDC is working with basically this Flovex Industries. It is a business with a previous, a retired but now businessman professor who has developed basically a small intensive aquaculture system that's can fit in a shipping container and can basically go anywhere within DC as long as it has a flat surface to sit on, a water and electricity source. And so there is a lot of movement towards that. We are building a 6-tank aquaculture system at the East Capitol Farm, so there will be fish available for people to buy there, which is going to be great. We also have several systems at our Muirkirk Farm. We have a smoker, and we are hoping to we are going to be contracting out some of that work to people who will be able to sell this directly to the public. So there's a lot of good stuff going on with aquaculture, for sure, with UDC.
Pamela, I guess you wanted to add something.
So, no, that's okay. Relatively unique at about Arcadia is that we also offer bonus bucks, the matching incentives, dollar for dollar on proteins. We buy a lot of proteins and we sell them at basically 50% off, and people can use their SNAP, only their SNAP because of regulations from the government. Produce Plus doesn't apply to this, obviously. There has been a prevailing sense at the federal level, and also I think, and it's rational, that low-income people need more access to fruits and vegetables, but the fact is that they also need access to clean proteins. So this year we sold 25,000 pounds of clean protein, antibiotic and hormone-free meat, eggs, and fish. The fish we sell is catfish from Wide Net Project, which is a nonprofit that is fishing wild blue catfish out of the Chesapeake. It's a Chinese invasive. It's eating all of the crabs and the mollusks. So this is a double benefit. And it's also a particularly delicious catfish. It doesn't taste muddy at all. So the challenge with this is that it's the funding for this is really hard to come by. We have one funder that doesn't cover all of our bills, so we're taking it out of Hyde, but we think it's important, so that's why we're doing it. We had one funder, which is this weird paleo catering company that are great, and they believe very strongly in the value of clean protein. So we are working on developing more support in the philanthropic community for this, but the fact is that really high-quality proteins, which everyone should be eating and less of in general, are expensive, and we have to find ways to make that affordable to low-income people, because the environmental costs to mass-produced CAFO meat are profound, and now the public health costs with the introduction of superbugs that are bred on these farms and jump to humans cannot be discounted. I think at least 6 full classes of antibiotics that have been developed in the past and have been used against infectious diseases are no longer effective against these superbugs. So we face a massive public health crisis, and then I think just a question of equity and normal public health with proteins.
Can you do chickens here?
You cannot. No animals.
Huge chicken problem. There's a huge chicken problem. It's very hard to get chickens. The regulations are that if a chicken is grown in Virginia, it can be slaughtered on farm, but only sold in Virginia. A chicken that can be sold across state lines, which DC is because we don't have chickens here, has to go to a USDA facility that automatically adds $5 to the cost of every single chicken. And there just simply aren't the slaughtering facilities that make this whole thing possible. And then big chicken and large meat processors really corner the market on the processing. There's lots of farmers growing this stuff really well, but then the cost comes in and how you get it to market and if it's going to have a USDA label or not.
And that's exactly what I was going to mention is that, in DC, we have a very unique situation where we are not a state. And that poses challenges for us on interstate commerce, particularly around farmers market items and especially around proteins. Both fish, chicken, beef, pork, but also eggs are a really big challenge to bring across state lines. And it's a challenge because we don't actually, I think the biggest challenge is around the fact that we don't actually have a Department of Agriculture in DC. Not that we need one. I certainly do not necessarily recommend that, but it does pose a challenge that we don't have one of those and that a lot of it ends up on the plate of the Department of Health that doesn't necessarily have that expertise in what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and we end up going with federal regulations, which again are not necessarily a bad thing, but do pose challenges when you're looking at something that's meant for the whole country and not just for one specific unique place. So it's definitely a challenge, but as Pam said, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people shop at Arcadia is that they have the half-price proteins.
There is a legislative fix to this. You'd have to work with the neighboring states. There is a program where you can apply to have a Virginia processing facility or a Maryland processing facility be counted as a USDA facility and be able to sell across state lines. The state has to fill out some paperwork, but I think a really compelling case could be made. We have a massive food market for this, and we'll talk.
Important reason to have a food policy council and food policy director to help make some of these little fixes on a regulatory side and not necessarily need legislation to go through. So we're really excited about this moving forward.
Thank you guys so much for your work and for being here. My question is that in some other cities where they're increasing urban farming, they're seeing increased rates of gentrification. I was wondering if the policy is going to be addressing any of these issues.
So I think that DC's legislation does a really good job of focusing on revitalization rather than on gentrification, and that it's really, I think, where this legislation came from was from community members, women of color who were already farming and who wanted support to be able to do that and wanted support to be able to sell the food that they were producing, which they couldn't do before the legislation was passed. And I think the fact that that is where this legislation came from, and the fact that there are people who are doing this within pockets of the city, and particularly in the lower income wards of the city, means that it's something that's much more community-based and is much less about, DC doesn't have a big banner up that's like, we have, unlimited land available like other cities do. So it's not that people are moving here for that purpose. I think it's more that the focus is on supporting people who are here who are doing this work. And if other people, and about making sure that we're connecting people who live within this city who are interested in doing farming into the existing framework of training programs that exist in this area, as well as in, we have a Cottage Food Act in DC that helps support some of those businesses that are, not on the farm themselves, but on the processing side of things, which I think is another great way to make sure that you're supporting the local businesses and people here in DC who are really focused on doing these activities.
I think there's always some risk when you bring change into the community that it could be seen as gentrification right off the bat. The reality, though, I think Pam made a good point about this in her presentation, that this is already a part of who we are in the city. This is already what we do, and to just bring it back, people are then like, oh my gosh, thank goodness you have it here. I've been to so many of these community gardens all over the city where people have been growing their own vegetables forever in this city, thinking about the quality of their food as really a priority. And that's really poor people as well as wealthy people. So unlike things like cost of housing and, you know, the whether or not fancy stores move into neighborhoods and stuff. All those things I think are really relevant to the question of gentrification because you're displacing something or somebody to do that. The reality is here is that I don't think this is displacement. I think it is bringing back something that is something people really want. And if they could have done it themselves, would have already done it. And so I think it's a really high quality thing for our city, for every neighborhood. I was thinking about protein too. And, you know, it's really a hard one because it couldn't really fit too much into the urban farming plan because so many people are so uneducated around what it means to raise the livestock in a quality way. I mean, you could raise livestock in the District of Columbia and it wouldn't be a problem at all. My sister has a school in Virginia, and it's a small school, and it's a Montessori school, so it's all hands-on, right? So they have a pig farm as part of their Montessori school. It's not very big, right? It only has about 4 sows, you know, basically puts out maybe 5 litters a year total, and raises them and sells them to market. Well, there's no reason. It's on her farm. The little farm she has a farm out there, and this is on the farm. And it's compact. I mean, the whole process is no bigger than, you know, maybe twice the size of this room. And it's pretty clean, and it's well maintained, and, you know, it's humane, and it's really amazing what they do. But for all these challenges of transporting and getting stuff around, I mean, it would be easy to do this. But if I were to say in this bill that I'm going to start allowing pig farming in the District of Columbia, I think people would freak out. I mean, I at one point said that I would be happy to have chickens. I really would love to have a couple chickens by my house. And I grew up with lots of chickens and fresh eggs, so I always wanted to do that. And not roosters, right? And how do you explain that to people, that it's not about roosters, it's about the chickens and the fresh eggs? And, you know, it just becomes an entire amazing laughingstock type thing where you can't get past the original conversation of it. If I were to say pigs or even cows, that would be amazing. But if you think about the value of a cow, especially a milk cow, that has to have a calf in order to produce milk, and then the calf can be raised and be slaughtered and then be fed, you know, a lot of protein to people, and then the milk can continue to provide quality milk. I mean, this is what we did on the farm when I was growing up. I mean, we had 2 milk cows, we had pigs, we had, you know, cows, we had steer, we had everything. And that was what a well-rounded diet meant. I mean, that's why my mom did it, because she thought that was what was well-rounded, and that was what was good for us. I think it was. I mean, after what I've done to myself since then, I'm still pretty good health.
We have time for one more question or comment.
I have one comment. First of all, I'm glad you brought up protein, because that's an issue. I'm working with an autistic group with special needs in the West, and we're having municipality problems all the time with the issue of protein. But we're raising some small pigs, we're raising some chickens, we have eggs and things like this. And if we can get it done in California, I guess we might be able to get it done anywhere. But the reintroduction, your point's really well stated. The reintroduction of livestock of any form into a urban area is crazy for most people. First of all, it's all about stinkiness and all this. Well, we solved the piggy problem by having a system that is very unique. It has no smell to it, so we've one hurdle at all. What I'm saying is, don't abandon this protein idea. Get what you're doing done right first, because you're on wonderful tracks, but carry this protein thing along, because remember, transportation is an issue. Processing, and the USDA, through the National Organic Program, by the way, has entrepreneurial development programs, including urban programs. And as I understand, there is a DC land grant here. So, I mean, there's some real opportunity. Oh, there she is, okay. But anyway, I just want to encourage you to continue to do that, because being mostly a vegetable grower with small fruits and small livestock, I can't imagine living without protein of one form or another, and we've got to re-educate from all the politics. I mean, you go on the Hill and talk about this stuff, and they say, really? Is that where an egg comes from? But thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Can I just say something to that?
Sure.
Just to bring it back, I think full circle here is that I don't have any problem. I personally don't have any trouble getting high quality protein delivered to my house whenever I want it. And you know, I order food from South Mountain Creamery. It delivers it right to my front porch. I just got a dozen eggs that, you know, and I think this goes back to the question of haves and have-nots, right? I mean, I can afford to do this. It's a priority to me, so I do it. I can go anywhere. I can go buy food. That's exactly, I think, what we're trying to say here is that we want to bring this to the people and let the city really develop this so that it's available readily every day.
Thank you very much to the panelists, Councilmember Grosso and Pamela and Lily from Arcadia and DC Greens, and also the audience. We had a great audience, and I've been chair of 2 panels, one about water, one about food and quality of food, 2 really basic things that are part of us that we need to take very seriously, and the way we did it today. Thank you very much. And I invite you, there will be across the street, there will be food, lunch, buffet style, so you are welcome to continue enjoying this great conference. And please join me to congratulate the panelists. Thank you.